You know that strange feeling of irritation that seems to come out of nowhere? That woman who, just by walking into a room, sparks a deep unease in you, a urge to push away, to judge, to criticize. It could be a coworker, an acquaintance, even someone in your family. And the worst part is, deep down, that she hasn't done anything serious to deserve this reaction from you. She just exists. She just talks the way she talks, acts the way she acts, expresses what she expresses, and inexplicably, it bothers you on a visceral level. Have you tried to understand it rationally? Have you listed her flaws, the behaviors that annoy you, the characteristics that displease you? And even after all that analysis, the feeling persists. Because it's not about her. It never was. That woman who bothers you so much is a mirror, a cruel, uncomfortable, but profoundly revealing mirror. She's showing you something that exists within you, something you've buried so deep you didn't even know it was there. Perhaps it's a part of you that you've repressed, denied, rejected. Perhaps it's a desire you've never allowed yourself to have, a strength you've always controlled, a vulnerability you swore never to show. And when you see that part reflected in her, when she dares to freely express what you keep locked inside, something within you rebels. Because she has the courage you lack, because she allows herself to be what you've never allowed yourself to be. And that, my friend, that hurts in a way words can't describe. Today, through a deep and revealing choice, you're going to discover which internal conflict is being mirrored in this woman who bothers you so much. There are moments when a simple choice reveals entire layers of our psyche that remained hidden under years of social conditioning, repression, and self-control. Sigmund Freud dedicated his life to understanding these invisible mechanisms that govern our feelings, our reactions, our seemingly inexplicable irritations. According to Freudian theory, nothing in our psychic life is accidental. Every reaction, every irritation, every discomfort has a reason for being, a root that delves deep into the territory of the unconscious. Right now, you're about to make a choice that will illuminate an aspect of this inner darkness. Before you, you'll see 4 women, 4 archetypes, 4 different ways of existing in the world. One of them will provoke an immediate sensation in you, an attraction or repulsion that comes from a place before thought. Don't try to analyze. Don't look for logic. Just observe which of these feminine presences resonates with something deep within you, something you might not even know exists. The first is a woman with a booming laugh and an expansive presence, who takes up space without asking permission, who speaks her mind without filters, who expresses joy and anger with equal intensity. The second is a woman of deep silences and a piercing gaze, who observes everything but reveals little, who keeps mysteries, who guards secrets like treasures. The third is a woman of delicate gestures and a soft voice, who is always available, who cares, who nurtures, who puts others' needs before her own. The fourth is a woman of firm steps and quick decisions, who commands, who leads, who doesn't accept submission, who challenges authority and breaks rules. Breathe, feel. Which one provokes the strongest reaction in you? Which one bothers you in a way you can't quite explain? That's your choice. And it will reveal far more than you imagine about the conflict that silently inhabits you. If you chose the woman with the booming laugh and expansive presence, you're facing a deep conflict between your repressed id and the controlling superego that dictates much of your life. This woman who bothers you so much represents what Freud would call the uninhibited expression of primary drives, a direct connection to the pleasure principle that you've likely learned to stifle from a very early age. Let's understand what's happening here. As a child, at some point in your development, someone taught you that taking up space was wrong. Perhaps they told you you were too much, that your joy was annoying, that your enthusiasm was embarrassing. It could have been a look of disapproval, a subtle comment, a comparison to someone more reserved. And you internalized it. You created a stern voice within yourself, an internal judge that constantly monitors your impulses, your spontaneity, your vitality. This judge is what Freud called the superego, the psychic instance that carries all the rules, prohibitions, and moral ideals we absorb from society. And your superego is particularly rigid when it comes to self-expression. It tells you that you must be moderate, controlled, that you can't draw attention, that you need to be discreet to be accepted. So, when you encounter a woman who simply ignores all these rules that you religiously obey, something within you rebels. She laughs loudly when you hold back. She takes up space when you shrink. She expresses anger when you swallow frustrations, and each of her manifestations is a painful reminder of everything you've forbidden yourself to be. The discomfort you feel isn't about her behavior. It's about her freedom. Freedom you deny yourself every day. But there's something even deeper in this conflict. The attraction to control, to restraint, often stems from a primal fear that if you allow yourself to feel fully, to let your vitality emerge uncensored, you'll lose control completely. It's as if there's an unconscious belief that your impulses are so dangerous, so destructive, that they need to be kept in an iron prison. Freud would speak here of the ego's anxiety in the face of the conflicting demands of the wild ID and the punitive superego. You don't trust yourself. You don't trust that if you open the door to spontaneity, you'll be able to close it again when necessary. So you keep everything locked up. And when you see someone living with the door open, you don't feel admiration, you feel fear. Fear that if you allow yourself, you'll lose something essential, some part of you that keeps everything running. And here lies the tragedy of this conflict. By repressing your vitality, by silencing your laughter, by diminishing your presence, you're not protecting anything. You're just becoming a smaller version of who you could be. The energy you expend on constant self-control is energy that could be fueling your creativity, your relationships, your joy. But recognizing this would require confronting years of conditioning, questioning the inner voices that seem to be protecting you but are, in fact, just keeping you trapped in an impoverished version of yourself. Have you ever stopped to think about how many opportunities you've missed because your first reaction was to hold back? How many connections that could have been deep remained superficial because you didn't allow yourself to show enthusiasm? How many joys were diminished because there was a voice telling you were being excessive? The woman who bothers you is living the life a part of you desperately wants to live. And the hatred you feel for her is, in fact, hatred for your own prison. The good news is that this realization can be the beginning of a transformation. Understanding that the discomfort comes from within, not from outside, is the first step to integrating those repressed parts. It's not about becoming exactly like her, but about reclaiming the right to exist fully, to express your vitality without paralyzing guilt. And not all paths of the unconscious are through the repression of joy. If you've chosen the woman of deep silences and piercing gaze, you're facing a conflict involving intimacy, vulnerability, and the terror of the unknown that resides in both the other and yourself. This woman who provokes your discomfort represents everything that cannot be controlled, predicted, or fully deciphered. And for you, that's an existential threat. Let's dive into what Freud might tell us about this. There's an imperative need in you for clarity, for predictability, for being able to completely map the emotional territory before allowing yourself to inhabit it. You're probably someone who needs to understand people's motivations, anticipate their reactions, always have a logical explanation for others' behaviors. And when you encounter someone who deliberately maintains mystery, who doesn't offer all the answers, who comfortably inhabits ambiguity, it activates a powerful defense mechanism in you. What's happening here has roots in what Freud would call primary anxiety related to helplessness. At some formative point in your life, you experienced a situation where failing to read the emotions of someone important resulted in pain, abandonment, or rejection. Perhaps one of your parents was emotionally unpredictable. Maybe you grew up in an environment where people's moods changed without warning, where you had to be constantly vigilant to detect signs of emotional danger. This created in you what we call affective hypervigilance, a compulsive need to decode others' internal states as a survival strategy. So, when you meet a woman who refuses to be an open book, who keeps layers you can't penetrate, it's not just frustrating, it's terrifying, because she puts you back in that state of primary vulnerability where you have no control over what's coming. But there's something even deeper in this discomfort. The silent, mysterious woman also represents aspects of yourself that you keep hidden, not just from others, but from yourself. Freud would talk here about repressed content that inhabits the deepest layers of the unconscious, thoughts, desires, and parts of personality that have been banished from consciousness because they were incompatible with the image you've built of yourself. When you see someone who seems to comfortably inhabit their own depths, who isn't afraid of what they might find in their inner silence, it reminds you of everything you avoid looking at within yourself. You've built an identity based on clarity, rationality, transparency, but beneath all of that, there are shadows you prefer to ignore, fears you've never named, desires you've never admitted, rages you've never expressed. And this woman, with her eloquent silence, with her refusal to explain everything, with her serene acceptance of mystery, is inviting you to do something that terrifies you. To look within without any guarantee that you'll like what you find. The defense mechanism you've developed against this is projection. You project threatening characteristics onto this woman. She's manipulative, you think. She's hiding something terrible. She's untrustworthy. But the psychological truth is that these are your own anxieties reflected back at you. You're afraid of your own depths, so you assume hers are dangerous. You distrust your own silences, so you interpret hers as threatening. It's a cycle of projection that keeps you safe from confronting your own unexplored layers. And here's the cruel irony of this conflict. By avoiding the mystery in the other, by demanding total transparency, by feeling threatened by someone who comfortably inhabits ambiguity, you're depriving yourself of the deepest, most transformative connections that exist. Because true intimacy doesn't come from knowing someone's every thought. It comes from trusting even in the face of the unknown. From accepting that there will always be aspects of the other that remain a mystery. And that's not a threat. It's beauty. It's the very essence of alterity, of recognizing that the other is genuinely other, not a predictable, controllable extension of yourself. Have you considered that perhaps the anxiety you feel in the face of this woman is in fact an invitation to develop tolerance for ambiguity, to trust without needing total control, to accept that not everything needs to be explained, mapped, understood, that there is wisdom in silence, power in mystery, and that your own depths, however frightening they may seem, are an integral part of who you are and deserve to be explored with curiosity, not fear. But there are still other mirrors that might be confronting you. If you've chosen the woman of delicate gestures and soft voice, the one who is always available to care for others, you're facing one of the most painful and least recognized conflicts of the human psyche. What bothers you about her isn't kindness, it's self-annihilation, and the discomfort comes from the fact that on some level you recognize this same dynamic within yourself and hate it as much in her as you do in yourself. Let's explore the Freudian layers of this particularly cruel mirror. Freud would talk here about reaction formation, a defense mechanism where we transform an unacceptable impulse into its opposite. You probably grew up in an environment where caring for others was the only acceptable way to exist, where your needs were secondary, where expressing your own desires was unforgivable selfishness. So you learned to transform your needs into attention to the needs of others. You learned to derive value not from who you are, but from how much you sacrifice. And you developed a deep, unrecognized rage against this dynamic. When you see this woman doing exactly what you do, putting everyone else before herself, smiling when she should be exhausted, saying yes when she should say no, helping when she should be resting, Something inside you rebels. Because you see your own prison reflected in her. You see how pathetic it is, how sad, how much it's a betrayal of yourself. But to acknowledge that directly would be to admit you're also betraying yourself every day. So, instead of feeling compassion for her and for yourself, you feel contempt. Contempt for her playing the game. Contempt for her not having the guts to stop. Contempt that is, in reality, a violent contempt for your own inability to break free from this pattern. Freud would tell us there's a brutal conflict here between what he called life instincts and death instincts. The part of you that wants to live, that wants to exist fully, that has legitimate needs and real desires, is constantly being suffocated by a sadistic superego that has convinced you your only valid way of existing is through caring for others. And every time you deny your needs, every time you annul yourself to be available, you are, symbolically, killing a part of yourself. This woman who bothers you is dying in the same way, and watching her slow death is like watching your own death in slow motion. But there's something even more disturbing in this conflict. On some unconscious level, you know this dynamic of self-sacrifice isn't genuine altruism, it's a survival strategy disguised as virtue. You learned very early on that your existence was only tolerated if you were useful, if you served, if you didn't bother anyone with your own needs. So you turned it into an identity. I am the person who takes care. I am the person who is always available. I am the person who puts everyone else before me, and you built an entire moral narrative around it. You are good, you are generous, you are selfless. But beneath that narrative, there's a darker truth. You're afraid that if you stop serving, if you start prioritizing your own needs, you'll discover there's nothing underneath, that you're just an empty shell with a mask of usefulness, that people only want you for what you do, not for who you are. And when you see this woman, you see this same dynamic at play, and you hate how much she seems to confirm your worst fears about relationships, about love, about human worth. She's proving you were right to be suspicious. People really only want what you can do for them. And that's unbearable, because it validates your prison, because it makes your self-annulment necessary, because it eliminates the possibility that there's another way. Here's the truth Freud would invite you to confront. The anger you feel towards this woman is justified. But the target is wrong. You're not angry at her. You're angry at the system that turned you both into perpetual servants. You're angry at the voices that said your needs were less important. You're angry that you believed your worth was conditional on your usefulness. And you have every right to be angry. But as long as you direct that anger at her, you keep avoiding the real confrontation. The confrontation with the internal voices that keep you trapped, with the fears that prevent you from claiming your right to exist regardless of how much you serve, with the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, you deserve love and attention even when you're not doing anything for anyone. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to simply stop, to say no without justification, to prioritize your rest, to express your needs? How much that terrifies you tells you everything about the depth of this conflict. And as long as you're projecting your horror onto this woman who mirrors your dynamic, you don't have to confront the possibility of change within yourself. But there's still one last face of this mirror to explore. If you've chosen the woman of firm steps and quick decisions, the one who commands without asking permission, who challenges authority and breaks rules, you're facing a deeply ingrained conflict with power, authority, and the terror of being perceived as dominant. This woman who bothers you so much represents the uncensored expression of what Freud would call necessary aggression, the capacity to assert one's will even in the face of resistance, to occupy leadership positions without paralyzing guilt. And that for you is absolutely intolerable. Let's descend into the depths of this conflict. You likely grew up in an environment where self-assertion was confused with aggression, where occupying positions of power was seen as arrogance, where leading was interpreted as dominating. Perhaps there was someone in your life who used power destructively, and you swore internally you'd never be like that. Or perhaps you were punished, humiliated, or rejected when you tried to assert your will, and you learned that the only safe way to exist was through submission disguised as humility. What happened, in Freudian terms, was the creation of a massive reactive formation against your own impulses of assertion. You transformed your natural capacity for leadership into something threatening, your legitimate desire to influence into something dangerous. And you developed an entire character structure based on being collaborative, on not imposing, on always considering others, on never appearing authoritarian. This made you safe, but it also made you powerless. When you encounter a woman who simply doesn't have these internal brakes, who allows herself to occupy space of power without apology, who makes decisions without consulting everyone, who commands without softening every instruction with 1,000 justifications, something inside you panics. Because she's doing exactly what you forbid yourself to do. She's exercising power, and she's not being destroyed by it. She's not being rejected. She's not becoming a monster. In fact, she seems to be thriving. And that completely destabilizes your internal narrative about why you need to stay small. But there is something even more disturbing at play here. Freud would talk about what he called identification with the aggressor. At some point in your life, you were dominated by someone. And that experience was so painful that you decided that under no circumstances would you ever make anyone feel what you felt. That's noble. But you went too far. You not only decided not to abuse power, you decided to renounce power altogether. As if the only way to guarantee you wouldn't hurt anyone was to become completely harmless. And harmless means powerless. It means having no capacity to influence, to change, to lead. You've psychologically castrated yourself. And now you see this woman exercising exactly what you've amputated from yourself. And the hatred you feel is proportional to the sacrifice you've made. You gave up so much, and she just took what she wanted. No guilt, no fear, without the internal torture you carry. But here's what Freud would help you see. Power isn't synonymous with abuse. Leadership isn't synonymous with domination. Assertiveness isn't synonymous with aggression. These equivalences were planted in you by specific experiences, by particular family or social dynamics. But they aren't universal truths. There are healthy ways to wield power. There is leadership that serves instead of oppresses. There are commands that liberate instead of imprison. But you'll never discover these ways while you're completely deprived of the capacity to experience power. By completely renouncing any expression of authority, you aren't being ethical, you're being a coward. And this woman who bothers you is reminding you of that every day. She's proving that it's possible to have a strong voice without destroying anyone, to have a clear will without annihilating others' wills, to make decisions without torturing each choice into paralysis, and that is unbearable to you, because it means your sacrifice was unnecessary, that you could have kept your strength and still been a good person, that the equation you built, strength equals danger, was false from the start. You've probably spent years developing sophisticated strategies of indirect influence, suggestions instead of commands, questions instead of statements, gentle manipulation instead of clear direction, and convinced yourself that this was moral superiority. But Freud would invite you to consider another possibility, that this is just fear disguised as virtue, fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of discovering that if you really stepped into your power, maybe no one would follow you. And then you'd have to confront the possibility that your current influence doesn't come from genuine respect, but from your ability to never threaten anyone, to always be safe, always predictable, always contained, always small. The woman who bothers you isn't afraid of being big, and every inch she occupies in the world reminds you of all the space you've refused to occupy, of all the times you stayed silent when you should have spoken, of all the decisions you let others make because you were afraid of making a mistake, of all the influence you could have had but renounced because you confused power with danger. And now you look at her and feel contempt. But the contempt is for yourself, for all that you could have been and chose not to be, for all the battles you could have fought but avoided, for all the difference you could have made but refused to, because making a difference requires occupying space, having a voice, wielding influence. And you convinced yourself that this would be becoming everything you hate. But what if you were wrong? What if it were possible? And the only way to find out would be to stop projecting your conflict onto this woman and start reclaiming, little by little, the power you've buried so deeply you almost forgot it exists. All these choices, all these women who provoke discomfort, are mirrors of internal conflicts that inhabit the vast and mysterious territory of the unconscious. Freud dedicated his life to demonstrating a simple but revolutionary truth. Nothing we feel is accidental. Every emotional reaction, every inexplicable irritation, every attraction or repulsion that seems to come out of nowhere, all these experiences are messages from parts of ourselves that have been silenced, repressed, denied. The woman who bothers you isn't the problem. She's just the messenger. And as often happens, we're shooting the messenger instead of reading the message. The message is always about you, about parts of you that need to be recognized, integrated, accepted, about aspects of your personality that were banished to the shadows because someone at some point convinced you they were unacceptable, about unrealized potentials, about unexercised strengths, about unhonored vulnerabilities. The path to self-knowledge, as Freud showed us, is neither linear nor comfortable. It requires us to look at our contradictions, our fears, our hypocrisies. It requires us to recognize that much of what we judge in others are projections of judgments we make against ourselves. That much of what we hate out there are aspects of ourselves we can't accept and hear. But there is also profound hope in this recognition, because if the problem is within you, the solution is also within you. You don't need to change this woman who bothers you. You don't need to convince her to be different. You just need to make peace with the part of you she represents. You need to reintegrate what has been fragmented, recover what has been repressed, accept what has been denied. This is the work of psychic integration. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole, about recognizing that you contain multitudes, that there is space within you for expansive joy and deep silence, for genuine care and powerful affirmation, that you don't have to choose one facet and reject all others. You can be complex, contradictory, multifaceted, and that's not confusion. It's full humanity. Each of these women you've seen represents a possibility of being that exists within you. The one who laughs loudly invites you to reclaim your repressed vitality. The one who remains silent invites you to explore your own depths without fear. The one who cares invites you to rethink where you lost yourself serving others. The one who commands invites you to reclaim the power you've buried. No choice is wrong. All are revealing. All are invitations to a deeper dive into who you truly are, beyond the masks you've built to survive, beyond the roles you've learned to play, beyond the limitations that were imposed or that you imposed on yourself. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these women provoked the strongest reaction? Which mirror showed you a reflection you didn't expect to see? Leave in the comments what your choice was. And if this video helped you understand something about yourself, if it made you see a pattern that was invisible before, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content on deep self-knowledge and psychological transformation. Because the journey to becoming who you truly are, beyond who they told you should be, is the most important journey you can take. And it begins exactly where you are now, with a choice, with a recognition, with the courage to look in the mirror, even when the reflection hurts, even when it reveals wounds you'd rather keep hidden. Because only by looking can you begin to heal. Only by recognizing can you begin to integrate. Only by accepting all the pieces of yourself can you finally become whole.